Hello YouTube, I'm Vince White. I'm an employment attorney. On this channel, we answer publicly posted questions from YouTube users, getting folks to answers they need from an employment attorney. Now, we had a question yesterday that we answered about religious accommodations. And it inspired in me a desire to do a better job delving into the quite complex world of religious accommodations in the workplace. A little bit of background. First, I guess me. I am technically Catholic. Grew up, I was an altar boy, spoke at the lectern during Mass, all the things. And during my confirmation, which is like, if you're not Catholic, it's like a confirmation for like teens to like devote themselves to their faith, because you're baptized in Catholicism when you're a baby, so you're not making a choice. So the confirmation is like you making a choice to stay in the faith. And while I was going through confirmation, I kind of just looked around and said, you know what? Turns out I like the community. All y'all are cool, but I don't care about this at all. And that disturbed a lot of people around me, obviously, but that's just where I landed. So do I think of myself as a Catholic? I guess. Am I practicing? Definitely not. Not even a little bit. And I don't particularly have an interest in what the Catholic faith says about right and wrong or anything like that, right? I don't think they're really that great of arbiters of those things. So when it comes to faith in general, I'm a bit of an outsider. I don't have a position on if God exists or not. Do I look like a fella who understands the metaphysics of the universe? I don't. I don't even look like a fella who understands employment law, and it's about the only thing I'm good at, right? So I do come to this as a person with no personal stake in it. No faith to call my own, as we might say. And we'll go a little bit further with the background. Part of the reason this channel hasn't talked about religious discrimination extensively is because we had an event we'll call the Pandy, because we have to be careful about the words we actually use, because YouTube gets real concerned about certain words. And the Pandy, which happened, in recent years, gave rise to a lot of really significant tensions about religious accommodations during a time when judges, arbitrators, administrative law judges were all incredibly dismissive of those claims. And there was reasons why they were dismissive: public policy arguments, utilitarian good arguments, things of that nature. I'm not going to get into that. I myself personally was somewhat sympathetic to the crowd who felt they wanted religious accommodations, although I was also well aware that many of the people seeking religious accommodations were just kind of like making up faiths or claiming that their faiths said things or required things that they do not. So it was a mess. It was a bit of a wasteland of shattered claims that were kind of going nowhere, and judges, arbitrators, and administrative law judges were not having it. And we actually had to even stop running ads during that time, because if you would run employment attorney ads, all these people looking for religious accommodations tied to the Pandy, tied to things around the Pandy, would obsessively call you. So you'd like turn on your Google ads or whatever form of ads you run, and people would just be clicking them, and you'd like leave it for a couple hours, and you come back and it'd be like a $10,000 bill, and you're like, that's a week's budget. What just happened, right? Like, it was wild. So we actually had to stop running ads. That's how big a deal this was in the field of employment law for a period of time, because realistically we couldn't help those people. We knew that judges were not having those cases. They just weren't accepting them. So it's just us spending time and money on cases that we know are going to lose, and that's not really viable, right? We wouldn't be here. Hold on. There's a lot going on today, so I got to check this. Okay. So, back to the video. That's kind of why. I don't have anything in my heart that says people shouldn't get religious accommodations. I actually believe strongly they should. I was even, as I mentioned, somewhat sympathetic to those people who are like, hey, why are you making me do things that I feel are against my religion? That's scary to me. I don't like it, right? Like that, I am sympathetic to that notion in general, right? Not sympathetic enough to like take my own money and fund those cases when I know they're probably not going anywhere. but sympathetic. And listen, you're all going to be like, you should have done that. Yeah, okay. Did you do it? Did you take your money and fund those cases? Oh, you didn't, did you? Okay, then. I guess you go ahead and fix yourself first, right? Anyways, I digress. But I do very much believe that employers should be forced to accommodate people with deeply held religious beliefs. I would say that is something I feel very strongly about. In part because I am pro-employee, and a really important thing to a lot of human beings' identity is their faith, right? So I would not differentiate realistically someone's race or gender identity or orientation or disability. These are all identity things, right? So too is your faith. Your faith provides some component of your identity. In my case, my general agnosticism or lack of faith provides some piece of my identity, right? Like people are like, tell us about your faith. And I say, I don't care about that. And the not caring about that is a piece of who I am, right? I don't tell you you're wrong. I don't tell you you're right. And I don't care, right? Like, it's just not interesting to me. And apathy is the perfect armor for all things, right? If you ever just want to get out of an argument, this doesn't interest me. This just doesn't interest me. I'm sorry, I don't care about this. I don't care who's right. I don't care what your thoughts are. I don't care what my thoughts are. I don't even have thoughts. I'm good, right? And let me assure you, I don't want to argue with anyone about their faith. But I do very much want to get them their accommodations. So that leads us to this video series, which is correcting a failing of the channel, in that I think we have provided insufficient information about the world, the realm of religious accommodation. And I'm not going to lie to you, there's a fella who did a hell of a job, and I'm going to link the article down below. His name is Frank Schuster, or Schuster, but I believe it's Schuster. And he works at the law firm of Constangy, Brooks, Smith, and Profit, LLP. And I'm going to heavily borrow from his work because we would be standing upon the shoulders of giants in so doing. And I suspect Frank, who I think is a defense attorney, I think he spent a lot of time on this. And I think he did a masterful job of distilling this down to an easily accessible summary that I'm going to distill even further. So, thank you, Frank. And I hope that this generates some business for you because you did an amazing thing. So real quick, we're going to touch on the concept because Frank does, the case Groff v. DeJoy. And this is not me departing from my refusal to give case law on the channel. This is just Frank did it. It made it easy for me, so I'm going to do it really quick. And Groff v. DeJoy, essentially, in Frank's take, it reinvigorated the duty to accommodate religious beliefs in the workplace. Boom, right? So we've got that. It's a reinvigorated duty. Excuse me. Now, you have a duty to accommodate a religion, but what is a religion for our purposes, right? Well, that's not that easy. Let's jump ahead to the United States v. Seeger, not Bob Seeger. I know. You're bummed. Turn the page. According to Seeger, and I'm quoting Frank here, a religious belief is one that occupies a place in a person's life parallel to the place filled by God in traditional religions. Frank goes on to note, well, that's about as clear as mud. Yeah, what does that mean? Right? I mean, like, that's a pretty notion, and you can kind of get some thoughts from that, right? But it's kind of intangible. Not a lot of nuts and bolts there, right? And listen, Frank gets into a lot of religions here. He lists a bunch. And what it comes down to is, if you have been practicing an established faith, an organized faith, a faith with written teachings or a structure around it, some kind of authority, some kind of cultural tradition, even ancient faiths. If you're reinvigorating Kemetic. Frank mentions Kemetic, which is an ancient Egyptian faith, right? That's likely to be recognized by a court. Wicca, which is it's a popular faith in the scheme of things. Listen, I dated someone who was a very devoted devotee of Wicca for a while. That would certainly be recognized, right? And Frank gets into a bunch of faiths here. The long and short of it is, if it's an organized faith, it's an established faith, ancient, current, otherwise, it's probably going to be recognized by courts. Now, you still then you can't make up things within the faith, right? The people all the time would come to me and be like, oh, I don't have to do this medical procedure because I'm Catholic. And I'd be like, well, the Pope, who you believe to be infallible, says you do. In fact, he tells you should. So that's not a thing. And they would say, well, I'm not that kind of Catholic. I'm like, well, that's going to be a toughie because Catholicism is pretty clearly defined. Right? You could be a different faith, but you can't say you're Catholic because that would be a different thing, right? If you can be a different faith that follows some of the tenets of Catholicism, and has some additional tenets that you want to follow. We can talk about that. But if you're saying you're Catholic, my understanding of Catholicism, the definition, as I understand it, is that you believe the Pope is infallible. And so, you making up additional rules that the Pope says are not rules is not generally going to receive accommodation, right? And we're going to have a video tomorrow talking about all that. What is and is not a reasonable accommodation for a religion. But suffice it to say, like if you're following an established faith of some kind, that's probably going to be recognized by the courts. Now, let's go a step further, though. New? Okay, so this is the EEOC guidance, and I'm quoting Frank again. The EEOC guidance on the subject is that these religious beliefs can include theistic and non-theistic beliefs that are new, uncommon, not part of a formal church or sect, and only subscribed to by a small number of people, or that seem illogical or unreasonable to others. And listen, Frank notes, holy cow, what's an employer to do? Yeah, right? That's broad, right? That is so broad. And Frank makes the point, going on in his article, which you can certainly read, that he would advise, as I believe defense counsel, that employers not second guess really any religious accommodation, because it is Frank's job, I suspect, to reduce the liability of his clients. And one of the best ways to do that is to get them to respect the accommodation process for all of these faiths. Because making a determination as to what is and is not a faith can be very, very difficult. However, I'm going to balance what Frank is saying here a little bit, because I am not a defense attorney, and I am a plaintiff side attorney, and there's something else going on here. Plaintiff side attorneys must decide, and they're not in any way judging your faith or deciding things about you based on your faith, but they must decide if you seem to be a sincere litigant who they can help, right? Because if you are talking about your case and it sounds like you're just making up things that you want to have happen in the workplace, and you're doing it in a fashion that makes you seem a little dishonest or a little shady, as we might say, it's not that we're judging your faith, we're judging you as a human, and we're saying, yeah, I don't think you're going to do great in the stand. I think this case is a lot of risk, and the things you're asking for sound odd, and I understand, we just said the things you ask for in religious accommodation can be unreasonable or illogical, but when you say it, it sounds like you're just self-serving. It sounds like you're making things up and you're a little disingenuous, and you as a person, I don't really want to represent, because I think I'm going to spend a lot of time and money on this case and get nothing for it, because I don't think when you go on the stand, anyone's going to believe you, right? And that's a problem. And that's the counterbalance here, the capitalist counterbalance, to the very broad definition of what the EEOC views as a religious belief that might be due an accommodation, right? You might as well just take the EEOC guidance and say, anything anyone believes. Theistic, non-theistic, doesn't matter. There's that's not the guide. There's more to the guidance. There's more to the guidance, but that goes probably beyond what we can achieve in a YouTube video. And Further, I'll note the case law in this field is very mixed about what is and is not a protected faith that receives reasonable accommodations, right? There's been a lot of cases going each way, and in many ways, it's different jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So that's all going on. And you've got the plaintiff's attorneys generally maybe a little reluctant to bring some of these cases. So when you're bringing your religious accommodation case, you are stepping into somewhat of a, for lack of a better term, a shitstorm. There's a lot going on here, and there's a lot to navigate. And probably the most important thing you can do is maybe follow our Find an Attorney playlist to help you sharpen up your pitch for attorneys, because you need to seem very genuine and very polished to get this done in a fashion that's going to obtain you representation for religious accommodations, right? And listen, that's not true. If you're if you need prayer accommodations because you're Islamic, that's well established. Attorneys understand that. If you need to keep the Sabbath holy, whether it be a Sunday Sabbath or a Friday evening Sabbath, whatever it is, right? Those are well established. Attorneys are aware of those. We bring those cases. Lots of employers infringe upon those rights, right? Those are things that attorneys know about and respect and understand. And there's lots of case law and things that people know to do in those cases. But when it's something new and we're uneducated, you might need to educate us about your faith. And in so doing, it is very important that you sound sincere. Otherwise, many attorneys are just going to check out and say, listen, you just want a ton of money and a ton of hours from me, and it seems like you might not be a sincere person. I respect your faith, but you, as a human being, don't seem that sincere. And so I'm not going to make you an offer of representation, right? And you want to avoid that because you do want representation, because I'll tell you right now, this field is complex. This little area of the law that we deal with, of all the fields, of all the areas, this is the most complex one, in my opinion. Maybe you can make arguments, maybe genetic discrimination. Maybe, right? But anyways, I digress. Check out Frank's article down below. It is fantastic, truly. And we're going to keep working on this series. Next up, the religious accommodation process. If this video was helpful, like, subscribe, comment down below. Share the channel so it may grow. Take care.